She told me she was going to a gathering of friends, leaving in a hurry as always, with that light perfume that used to make me smile even on difficult days. I responded with a kiss on the corner of her mouth, as if she'd already known the routine. But something inside me ached. Something small, like an invisible splinter that bothers for no reason, and yet it made me get in the car minutes later and follow her. Maybe it was the way she avoided my eyes or the way her phone sat face down on the table all day. Maybe it was just instinct. And instinct doesn't lie. She said she'd see friends. But I saw her. I saw her smiling at a man I'd never seen before, touching his hands with an intimacy that excluded me from the story, as if I'd never existed. And that hurt. It hurt as if all the love we'd once built had been ripped from me with her own hands. And he smiled too, with an air of conquest so irritatingly confident, as if he knew exactly what he was doing, taking from me what I never imagined losing. They laughed. Laughed. As if our home, the promises, the complicit silences, and the nights she cried on my shoulder were nothing more than a fragile past. I felt the ground disappear, my legs tremble, my breath catch. I returned home without being able to look back. Without thinking. I just acted. I left a note. Short. Cruel. Precise. The truth got here before you. There was no scandal. There was no slamming of the door, no screams. Just the end. The silence of the end. A silence so deafening it seemed to echo off the walls of the house, which was no longer a home. A house that once smelled of coffee and laughter on Sunday mornings now tasted bitterly of lies. She didn't respond. Maybe she didn't even understand right away. Maybe she imagined 1,000 ways to manipulate me again. But I had seen. And those who see can no longer unsee. Those who feel the pain of betrayal up close can no longer pretend it didn't hurt. And it did. As if a train had run over my chest. From that moment on, I disappeared from her life. I didn't text. I didn't accept calls. I got rid of the little souvenirs one by one. I kept some, I confess. But not out of longing. Out of respect for what was once true. To the kisses in the middle of the night, the promises made in the rain, the plans whispered in her ear. Because even though she destroyed everything, I knew what I felt. And no one could take that away from me. She, on the other hand, tried to stay with her lover. She tried to make sin a daily occurrence. She tried to make betrayal a new routine. But the problem with a relationship born of lies is that it already begins to die. And that's what happened. Little by little, she realized that what seemed like freedom was just need. That the man who made her laugh knew nothing about her. He didn't know her fears, her traumas, or why she couldn't stand sleeping with the lights off. He wasn't a safe haven. He was just a beautiful boat adrift. And by throwing herself into him, she lost everything. She lost me. She lost the most beautiful version of herself, the one that existed when we were together. I suffered. I won't lie. I suffered through the night wondering what I'd done wrong. Blaming myself. Hating myself. Wondering if I shouldn't have been more attentive, more affectionate, more of a man. But the truth is, sometimes the fault lies not in the one who loves, but in the one who doesn't know how to be loved. And she didn't. She had it all. She had loyalty. She had acceptance. She had love on bad days. And she chose the fire of a moment over the warmth of a lifetime. Time passed. And the pain became a scar. Longing became a memory. And I met someone. Someone who doesn't compare me, who doesn't live by what's missing, but by what is. Someone who chooses me loyally every day, even when I'm not easy to love. Someone who looks at me as if she'd found what she'd always been looking for, not as if she were just trying out a new flavor. And that's when I realized, I haven't lost anything. She's the one who lost. Months later, she sought me out. She came, head down, without makeup, without the artificial glow with which she hid herself from the world. She simply said she was sorry. She didn't try to justify it or play the victim. She said with a choked voice that she regretted it. That she had traded an entire love for an empty moment. That she thought she was experiencing something new, but in truth, she was only distancing herself from herself. I listened. Because I'm still the same man you always heard. And I offered forgiveness. Not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. She asked if there was a chance of going back. I just smiled and said, what we once were is in the past. And it really did. Today, we go our separate ways. She carries the weight of her choices. And I, the lightness of having survived them. The story could end here. But it doesn't. Because her true punishment wasn't losing me. It was seeing that I was capable of loving again. That I was capable of smiling with someone else. That her love wasn't irreplaceable. And, even worse, it was disposable. But there's one detail. One she never knew. One that changes everything. Something that happened before the betrayal. Something that might explain why I endured so much. Something that, if she knew, might make the regret unbearable. And that detail, that secret, was never spoken aloud. But it was always there, silently, shaping every decision. She wasn't the only one hiding something. And maybe, just maybe, if she'd known what I hid, she would never have forgiven herself. Because love doesn't end with betrayal. But silence can destroy everything. Welcome to the channel. Here, we'll make one thing clear from the start, let's never romanticize betrayal. The stories you'll hear are fictional, but they reflect hard truths about hurtful choices, broken promises, and wasted loves. The goal is simple, to show that cheating isn't an adventure, it's destruction. Get ready. What's next? It's strong, real, and will mark you. Press play, and feel the weight of a shocking story. It was impossible to say exactly when they had fallen in love. Perhaps it was on an ordinary evening, after a conversation too long to be casual. Or perhaps on a morning when she laughed too loudly at coffee and he silently thought he would want to hear that laugh for the rest of his life. The truth is, the love between them came not like a storm, but like a rising tide, a steady, silent, natural coming together. His name was Daniel. Hers was Emily. He, with his calm voice and steady gaze. She, with her restless presence and impulsive heart. Different enough to challenge each other, yet compatible enough to believe they had found what so many people spend their lives searching for, a safe place within each other. Daniel was the kind of man who spoke little but felt a lot. His eyes held a hard-to-find honesty, and when he loved completely. He wasn't one to fill the air with promises or rehearsed phrases. He demonstrated it in his gestures, in his constancy, in the way he learned her details, her favorite flavors, her strange quirks, the silences that said more than words. He had a rare patience, cultivated from a young age, the result of an upbringing marked by the absence of his father and the firmness of a mother who taught him that love wasn't noise, it was presence. He worked as a graphic designer at a small agency and always arrived home before 7, punctual, predictable. Emily said he was her rock, the steady point amidst the chaos she herself sometimes created without realizing it. Emily, on the other hand, was pure intensity. Her eyes always seemed to be searching for something more, even when everything was going well. With a degree in communications, she loved to talk, question, and discover. Her energy was what attracted people, but also what often left her exhausted. She was sweet, but restless. Loving, but sometimes too impulsive. She had a history of shallow loves before Daniel, relationships that ended before they even began, perhaps out of fear of taking the plunge or perhaps because she'd never found someone who looked at her with the same depth he did. When they met, it was as if she'd, for the first time, found someone who didn't want to fix or mold her, but simply stay, even when she lost a bit of herself. The beginning was light, almost naive. Long walks after work, coffees in the late afternoon, messages exchanged until sleep overcame them. But it didn't take long for the feeling to take shape, for plans to include two names, for the keys to be exchanged, and Sundays to become sacred. They rented a small apartment with a balcony and natural light. It was simple, but it was theirs. They painted the living room wall together, chose furniture on a shoestring budget, and transformed every space into a memory. The kitchen became a stage for awkward dances, the sofa a witness to old movie marathons and impromptu dinners. Their routine began to take shape with each other's presence. Emily learned to slow down, and Daniel discovered there were more colors in the world than he imagined. They grew together. For the first 2 years, they hardly fought. They argued, of course, about who would wash the dishes or whether it was worth buying a new TV, but they never slept in silence. Emily had this urge to resolve everything before nightfall, as if the darkness made the disagreements worse. Daniel, even more reserved, gave in because he knew it mattered to her. They learned to compromise. To share. To listen. There was respect. There was complicity. Close friends said they seemed to have found each other too soon, as if they were the kind of couple who would grow old together without needing much to be happy. Perhaps this created a dangerous idea of eternity. Perhaps comfort caused certain shadows to hide where they weren't expected. Over time, however, small cracks began to appear. Nothing that seemed urgent, but things that gradually gained ground. Emily sometimes seemed distracted. She took longer to respond to messages, spent more time on her phone, changed her tone of voice when Daniel asked about her day. He, on the other hand, tried not to create ghosts. He'd seen how insecurity can corrode a relationship from within and made a point of giving it space, not suffocating it. But he felt it too. Even without knowing how to explain it, he felt it. Emily was more absent. More spaced out. More distant from everything that had once been routine between them. Their walks diminished. Bedtime conversations were replaced by the glow of his phone. But Daniel believed it was just a phase. Maybe work, maybe fatigue, maybe time doing what time does to relationships, taking the shine off the newness and testing the depth of the connection. In more intimate moments, there was still tenderness. There was still touch, there was still laughter. But it wasn't the same anymore. And though he tried not to admit it, the absence of certain words, of certain gestures, was starting to hurt. He tried to compensate, surprising her with dinners, little gifts, notes left around the house. Emily smiled, thanked him, but the look was no longer the same. And he could feel it. He tried to talk, but she always said everything was fine, that it was just stress, that she needed time. And he gave it to her. Because he trusted her. Because he believed the love they'd built would endure. But inside, anguish grew. A restlessness that didn't match the lightness of someone in love. Emily, in her complex nature, also felt guilt seeping through the lines of her relationship. As much as she tried to maintain her appearance, her heart was already filled with doubts. She felt something inside her slowly disconnect, as if the version she'd lived with Daniel was no longer enough. But it was never a lack of love. It was something else. A restlessness she couldn't name, a longing to feel alive again, to experience something that didn't fit into the predictability of everyday life. She loved Daniel, but she missed herself. Something I might never have had. And instead of searching within, she began searching outside. Not deliberately, but like someone who slips without realizing it. And this choice, even if silent, began to take its toll. Meanwhile, the world around them remained the same. Friends still saw them as role models. Social media portrayed a happy couple. Family made plans with them. But inside the apartment where so many promises had been made, love clung to what little was left. Daniel continued to believe. Emily continued to hide. And life, merciless, continued to drag them both into a curve from which neither of them would ever emerge the same. But nothing, absolutely nothing, would prepare Daniel for what was to come. Because no matter how many storms their love had weathered, neither of them realized that the real danger wasn't time, it was choice. And when the choice was finally made, its echoes would rip through everything they'd built, tearing down walls, silences, and memories. But it wasn't time to know yet. Not yet. Because before the fall, there's calm. And it was in this calm, in this apparent balance, that history began to unravel. Slowly. Without fanfare. Without warning. Like everything we once believed would last forever. That Friday, the sky was overcast, as if the weather had predicted what was to come. Daniel left work a little early, feeling an unease he couldn't name. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was a strange silence inside his chest, as if something was building up there, waiting for the right moment to explode. Emily had been different for weeks, but that afternoon, there was something else. She'd left saying she was meeting some friends for dinner. He simply nodded, as he always did, but when he closed the door, he stood still for long minutes. His eyes fixed on nothing, his body still, but his mind racing. Then, as if he didn't think, only felt, he grabbed his coat and left. He followed her at a distance, unsure of exactly what he expected to find. He wasn't a man of undue jealousy, but he no longer trusted his own intuition. And it was that intuition that led him to the place. A discreet restaurant with heavy curtains and low lighting. Outside, he looked out the window and his heart sank at the sight of her. She was there, yes, but not with friends. Sitting across from a man, she was smiling in a way he hadn't seen in months. The kind of smile he thought had been his alone. And then, as if time were tearing itself apart, she placed her hand over his. A small, simple gesture. But it was enough. Daniel felt his stomach churn, his face heat up, reality shatter before his eyes. He didn't need anything else. That scene was the answer to all the questions he'd been avoiding asking. He returned home in silence. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply wrote a note, his hand trembling and his heart numb. The truth arrived before you. And he was gone. Emily arrived hours later, inattentive, perhaps still caught up in the euphoria of the encounter. Seeing the note on the table, she froze. She read it once. Then again. And again. Her legs felt weak. She sat down, her mind trying to process what it meant. She ran through the rooms, calling for him, but the apartment was empty, as if it had never been lived in. He picked up his cell phone and called. Voicemail. He sent messages that went unanswered. And there, sitting on the floor of the living room where they had laughed together so many times, she began to understand what she had done. It wasn't just a mistake. It was destruction. In the days that followed, she tried every means possible to contact him. Messages, calls, emails, even letters left at the door. Nothing. Daniel had disappeared. Cut everything off. Mutual friends said he was fine, but he wouldn't talk about her. His family also kept their distance. Emily began to realize she hadn't just lost her partner. She'd lost her home, her ground, her future. Her lover. It didn't last long. Very long. When she talked about making it real, he laughed. He said he'd never promised anything. That he thought she knew what they were doing. That it was just lightness, a distraction. You were bored, so was I. We helped each other pass the time. That's all. His words were like slaps in the face. She returned home alone. She cried until she couldn't breathe. And then, everything fell silent. Life went on, but the weight of regret wouldn't leave her. A few months later, chance, or perhaps fate, crossed their paths again. Emily saw him from afar, crossing the street with another woman. A simple figure, but with a genuine smile, holding his hand as if holding something precious. Daniel seemed light, serene, unrecognizable in his peace. She felt her heart tighten, a mixture of longing and despair. When he saw her, he hesitated for a second, but didn't stop. He didn't break his smile. He just kept going. Days later, Emily summoned the courage to seek him out. Not to win him back. She knew it might be too late. But she needed to talk. To explain. To ask for forgiveness, even if it was just to lighten her own load. She waited for him at the door, her hands trembling and her eyes brimming with tears. When he arrived, their eyes met for several long seconds. She tried to smile, but he merely nodded, as if allowing her presence but not her affection. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice faltering, her gaze lost. He said he'd made a mistake. That he'd confused freedom with escape. That he didn't know he was breaking something irreparable. That he was the most sincere love he'd ever known, and that he'd traded it for emptiness. He asked for forgiveness, with the humility of someone who'd already lost everything. And for the first time since the separation, Daniel spoke. He said he forgave her. Not with anger, nor superiority. But with truth. That he no longer held a grudge, only memories. That he had cried all he needed to, and that he was now happy. Emily swallowed hard, nodded, but before leaving, she asked what he saw in the new woman. What she had that she hadn't had. Daniel looked at her with a cutting calm. He said it wasn't what she had. It was what she hadn't destroyed. Emily didn't answer. She just lowered her head. But just as she was about to walk away, Daniel called her over. He said there was something she never knew. Something he'd kept hidden, even when they were still together. A secret that changed everything. Emily frowned in surprise. And he continued. He told her that, weeks before the betrayal, he'd discovered an old letter she'd written on their first anniversary. A letter she'd hidden between the pages of a book. In it, she said she'd never be able to love another man as much as she loved him. That she saw in him the home she'd always dreamed of. That, despite all her fears, she was ready to stay. That letter made him decide he would propose to Emily at the end of that month. He'd bought the ring. It was tucked away in the back of his office drawer. He was waiting for the right moment. The right restaurant. The right song. He was planning to surprise her. Make that moment a new beginning. But before he could, she betrayed him. Emily staggered. Her eyes filled with tears in a flash. Her mouth hung open, as if Daniel's words were punches. He continued. He said the ring was still with him, but that it was now a thing of the past. Just like her. Emily tried to say something, but the tears wouldn't let her. The silence between them became unbearable. She turned slowly and walked away, her body hunched over and her shoulders heavy. There was no scream. No scene. Just the final realization that, in the end, the greatest punishment for those who cheat isn't being left, it's knowing that if they had waited a little longer, they would have had it all. And in that moment, for the first time since everything happened, Daniel closed the door lightly. Not to protect himself. But to move on. Daniel never saw her again. After that last conversation, there were no messages, no attempts at reconciliation, no further apologies. It was as if, with those words, he had closed a door that would never be reopened. And she knew. She knew the moment his footsteps echoed alone along the sidewalk that there was no more space, no more chance, no more return. His silence hurt more than any argument could have. Because it was a silence of peace. The peace of someone who has forgiven, of someone who has overcome, of someone who has decided to live a new story without carrying the debris of the previous one. And it was this peace that destroyed her inside, not because he wanted to hurt her, but because she knew that this was the peace he had tried to build with her for so long and that she, out of impulse, vanity, weakness, chose to disregard. It wasn't rejection. It was consequence. Emily moved on with her life, but never at the same pace. She lived in the same small apartment, now without the sound of his laughter, without the smell of the coffee he made every morning, without the notes left on the refrigerator door. She tried going out, meeting new people, filling the void with casual encounters and short-lived conversations. But nothing stuck. Nothing compared. Because loving someone like Daniel wasn't common. And losing someone like him was a kind of slow punishment, eroding with every memory, with every gesture from the past that insisted on reappearing on the quietest days. She continued working, smiling at others, feigning normalcy. But every night, when she lay in bed, the regret returned. It was no longer a desperate cry, but a constant whisper, reminding her of what she had given up. Time passed, but time didn't heal. Time only taught her to live with absence and with the awareness that some choices cannot be undone. Daniel, however, rediscovered himself in small details. In the calm of preparing a leisurely dinner, in the freedom of listening to loud music on Saturdays, in light conversations with colleagues who became friends, and, later, in a new woman. She appeared without him even looking for it. Not as a salvation, but as a surprise. She had sincere eyes and a serene way of approaching things, as if respecting the space he was still rebuilding within himself. She didn't ask for urgency or explanations, simply offered her presence. And little by little, he allowed it. First, a coffee. Then, an afternoon. And before he knew it, he was laughing again. Not with the same innocence as before, but with maturity, with the awareness of someone who has learned, suffered, and overcome. The new relationship was built on respect and reciprocity. And unlike the previous one, it wasn't born of impulse, but of the daily choice to stay. He introduced her to his friends and family, and before he knew it, she was already a natural part of his life, as if she had always belonged there. Years later, the unexpected happened. Daniel became a father. A son with curious eyes and a wide smile. And in that new role, he found parts of himself he thought were buried. Being a father gave him a new dimension of love, a love that didn't require a past, just presence. Emily heard the news through social media. She saw a casual photo of him holding the baby in his arms, his gaze serene, his smile light. It took him a few minutes to process. He didn't cry. He just felt something break inside. A last piece that resisted believing there would ever be room for them again. That image was the definitive confirmation that he had started over, and that new love had blossomed where she left the ruined field. She turned off her phone, looked in the mirror, and, for the first time, saw herself as she truly was, a woman who made a choice and had to live with it. Daniel, for his part, never desired revenge. His greatest triumph was moving forward without holding a grudge. He didn't forget what he experienced with Emily, nor did he ignore the good times. But he learned that love, to last, requires loyalty even in times when everything seems to be failing. He never spoke of her again. He tucked that story away in a discreet place in his memory, where the most painful and profound lessons reside. And when his son one day asked him how he knew he loved his mother, Daniel smiled and replied, "Because even with everything I've been through, I've never wanted to be anywhere else but by her side." Emily grew old without scandals, without great loves, with a seemingly peaceful life. But on every birthday, every late afternoon, there was a persistent thought. What if I had waited? What if I had been more patient? What if I had appreciated what it offered me? But time doesn't answer questions. It just moves on. And she moved on too, with her own silences, her own absences, and the constant reminder that true love doesn't shout, doesn't hold, doesn't suffocate. It remains, until there's no more room for it to remain. And when it leaves, it doesn't return. Not in the same way. Their story didn't end in tragedy, nor in reconciliation. It ended as many real-life stories do, with losses that teach, with scars that mark, and with the knowledge that we don't always get a second chance. Daniel found peace, a new love, and the life he always deserved. Emily found the price of her choices. There was no punishment. There were consequences. If you've made it this far, tell us in the comments, what did you think of this story? What part resonated with you the most? We want to hear your opinion. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here you'll find real, hard, and moving stories, showing a side of life many prefer to ignore. Cheating isn't romance, it isn't liberation, it isn't adventure. Cheating destroys families, erodes trust, and slowly kills the purest love. It's always a choice. And every choice has a price. This channel does not support, in any way, any type of cheating. Until the next story. And remember, those who truly love choose to stay.